Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about the basics of history. First of all, what is history exactly? Well, the entire story of history is essentially this. Everybody needs to use the bathroom, but there's only one roll of toilet paper. No, of course, that's not really it. But essentially, this situation is present throughout all of recorded history, in that basically everyone around the world throughout history has needs and wants, and everything has a limit. The idea that everyone throughout the entirety of history has things that they want, things that they need, but everything out there, every resource available has limits. So essentially, history really is the story of something called scarcity. This is where we have limited resources out there to fulfill unlimited wants and needs. And all history is, it's a look into the window at how people dealt with it, how people reacted to it, how people tried to share or go to war or create music and art and literature to describe it. I mean, it's all about the concept of limited resources to fulfill unlimited wants and needs. When you really wrap your head around that, it becomes easier to understand what history really is about. When you think about like the first people to ever come to North America, they came about 20 to 25,000 years ago. They came across a land bridge way up here where Alaska is, or down along the coast. They settled through North America. And you might say, like, well, like, what's the issue of scarcity here? Well, there are already things that lived here. Land is scarce, and those things were these. I mean, we had saber-toothed tigers, we had massive armadillos, we had Columbian mammoths, we had like literally giant beavers, we had American lions, and then these birds that were looked like massive condors that were almost the size of the lions. These all existed on that land, but land is scarce. There are unlimited wants and needs and limited resources. So when man first came here, man ran up against a lot of these animals. And you might question, like, where did these animals go? Well, a lot of them ended up having to compete for land with human beings that knew how to get together in groups with spears and knives and hunt and kill things, um, much better than the animals killing each other. And of course, one of the impacts of scarcity is things like mammoths and saber-toothed tigers and American lions. A lot of them went away because they were extinct. They were hunted to extinction. Okay, this is an example of scarcity, and from then on, man dealt with land and labor and capital, as we will see, trying to get those resources to meet their unlimited wants and needs. Really, the correct definition is history is a story of how people have dealt with scarcity constructed from evidence that is found in sources. Okay, the story of how people have dealt with scarcity constructed from evidence found in sources. And of course, when we look at the overall scope of history, what we're trying to do is study people and how people dealt with scarcity. And of course, we're dealing with the past. So anything that's happened before us, even like yesterday, that is the idea of history. So how have people in the past dealt with scarcity? And then we look using evidence from sources. That's something that says something about the past. All right. You bring this together, you got a whole scope of what history is about, how human beings in the past dealt with scarcity, and we look at evidence and sources. Okay. That is going to try to give you, and remember, this is not an exact science. You do the best you can with the sources you have from history. What is a source? Well, a source is simply something used to learn about the past. Okay. A source, common ones would be things like, people think TikTok. That's a source that's actually you can learn about the past. The New York Times, The Economist is a magazine. Of course, CNN is the TV. ChatGPT would be a source, and then things like textbooks. But the thing is that anything that existed that teaches us about the past, that would be considered an actual source. Okay, so you have like letters from Winston Churchill, who was the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom in 1940. This is a letter where he responds to his secretary saying, hey, look, Adolf Hitler is marching across Europe. We need to create the best peace terms possible. And Winston Churchill writes that little response right there and says, I am ashamed of you for writing such a letter. I return it to you and to burn and forget. I mean, these letters are very important. It shows something about what is happening in this time period of history. Uh, Guernica is a painting by Pablo Picasso. It's done in Cubism. It is in 1937, and it portrays. It is in black and white. By the way, that's not an error, but he makes it in black and white. And if you actually look at it, you will see some pretty horrific imaging. And it's about when the Nazis during the Spanish Civil War bombed a town in Spain in 1937 and killed a lot of people. And this is his. This is like another image of what is a source of what happens in terms of history during that time. You have a shirt, Nirvana, designed by Kurt Cobain, the leader of Nirvana in 1990s, kind of the grunge movement. This is a source about history, about what people were listening to and kind of how they were thinking. Of course, Magic Johnson announcing he is HIV positive on CNN. This is kind of an idea like how we saw things like HIV and AIDS and the NBA and how television really impacted us in November of 1991. Then, of course, now you get into something like TikTok, where you have Zach King, who's an illusionist, and he creates this little Harry Potter style illusion in December of 2019. That too is a source of history of what people were looking at, doing, what they were concerned about. All right. Now, evidence is specific details used for a specific purpose, and you find evidence within sources. Okay. So you have this source here, and from it, you gain different types of evidence. That equals a part of history. Of course, you need a bunch of sources to get a real look at history. So if we look at Winston Churchill's letters, what's the evidence show? Well, the evidence show that there's a concern that Germany's attacking in Europe. Somebody referenced a deal. And then Churchill's like, hell no, we're not, get rid of this Hitler guy. We're not going to make a deal with him. We're going to do battle. Okay. So we have a little tiny sliver of history there. Nirvana's shirt. What does this show? Well, we know that Nirvana is a grunge band, so it had some kind of type of music that comes out in the early 90s, that there were issues. Like if you look at the picture, that there might have been issues with mental health because it's kind of a symbol of that. And that, of course, that shirt is actually culturally iconic. It's very popular. People wear it now in 2025 and never have listened to Nirvana. So there's something about that icon, and that's a slice of history. And then, of course, Zach King's illusionist little thing on TikTok, it had 2.5 billion views. So it's something that people were interested in. The fact that he was doing it using an illusion. And of course, maybe it was a reference to Harry Potter that in 2019, Harry Potter might have been a little more popular back then. Okay. Now, there are two types of sources you're going to be looking at in this class. One is a primary source. This is a source created by someone who experienced or actually witnessed something firsthand. So your documents, like the Winston Churchill letters, very much a primary source. Artifacts, things you can hold and touch, any data that was taken, any statistics, internet communications like emails or screenshots, websites, speeches, artwork, interviews, an autobiography by a person. If they write their own story, that's an example of a primary source. Primary sources are some of our best forms of sources about history. Then you have secondary sources. This is a source created by someone who interprets other primary sources and really never experienced or witnessed this event firsthand. This is all your newspapers and magazines, your textbooks, your biographies by other people, documentaries, Wikipedia, commentary about it, your chat GPT, anything AI. This would be considered your secondary type of source. Okay. So if your primary sources here, you have your secondary sources here. Out of these sources, you get your evidence. Okay. Now, when we look at evidence, we're trying to ask a variety of questions. Who made it? What do we know about the creator? When was this created? Where was this created? What type of source, primary or secondary? Who is it actually made for? Why was it created? What's the purpose? And of course, what is the person's point of view? Because sources, we need reliability in sources. All right. Is the source actually useful for me? Is it really reliable? Is it somewhat reliable, or is it totally unreliable? Now, all sources do fulfill a purpose. They can make something like, "Oh, wow, this source has proven that this is true," or wow, this is actually source has proven that this is false. But we want to look and make sure that whatever the source we're looking at, there's some reliability to it. And even People that are primary resources are known to sometimes lie, and so that's why you need other multiple sources to check things. Every source somehow often has a bias. Usually, data or statistics are going to be your least biased things. And of course, a bias is an opinion based on emotion or personal preference. This is why when you look at primary sources, such as people, you got to be careful because there's going to be a bias to how that person viewed any kind of event, and that might impact the reliability of that source. Okay, so the letters from Winston Churchill, uh, they are considered a very reliable, source. But understand that he was working with a bias. He hated Adolf Hitler, and he hated the idea that Hitler was coming and trying to take over all of Europe during World War II. So, but that is his bias. Now, it is an angle of World War II. It's considered very reliable, but you do have to realize that he did not like Adolf Hitler, which of course is good. This is less. We know he has a bias. He likes Harry Potter, but this isn't really like something like we're trying to get some kind of controversial opinion. So this would be, when we're talking about what did people watch for entertainment in, the late 20s, early 2020s, we have TikTok, and it's kind of an illusionist thing. All right. So is there a bias here? Yeah, yeah. He likes Harry Potter. Harry Potter may or you may not be your thing, but then it's a different kind of window, a different kind of source, and a different kind of history. It's more like, what kind of things did we look at? So we looked at if this was like something about the 20 teens. Is this kind of a reliable source about what people were looking at and watching? Yeah, it's pretty reliable, even though it's not anything controversial. All right. So history is about how people have dealt with scarcity, with that limited resources, unlimited wants and needs. And to study that, we get into sources and evidence, making sure that the sources and evidence are as reliable as possible.